Guess what? The folks at the Center for American Progress, they say that Trump's plan to increase tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods by 25%, on Chinese products by 10%, will cost a typical American family some $1,300 a year. Joining us right now is Morgan Harper. Morgan, of course, is with the American Economic Liberties Project, joining us from Columbus, Ohio. So, with all these folks, Morgan, who voted for populism, they were angry with Biden and Harris when it came to inflation. They said that gas was too high and food was too high and all these things were too high. But this is what they voted for?
Well, as we know, it's not always clear what exactly voters are looking for based on how they cast their votes. I mean, there's no denying that prices are very high for a lot of people. That's a fact. I think it's also important for people to know that in this tariffs discussion, a lot of the tariffs that we saw actually happened during the Biden administration, but they were different than what Trump is talking about here, and that they were strategically placed tariffs that were paired with industrial policy, meaning an investment in building up domestic production. What Trump is talking about is pretty much, and what he was talking about during the campaign, is just across the board tariffs. We're just going to put tariffs on every good. And as you mentioned, that is very likely to increase prices because you aren't pairing it with any sort of domestic policy agenda that's going to make cheaper goods available here in the U.S. And so that is pretty irresponsible and should, and most likely will, lead to price increases if he actually follows through with it.
And of course, now you have all of his supporters go, no, 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 no. This is all about negotiating. He's threatening these things in order to get them to do something about illegal immigration. But they're already doing things. And the Mexican president dropped a letter making it perfectly clear how things are going to stand between the country. And so it's just interesting just watching all of this play out.
It is really interesting. And like you said, I mean, a lot of if the concern is immigration, fentanyl, well, the highest percentage of people who are bringing that across the border are actually American. And so if you want to address immigration issues, then you should use immigration policy to do that. If you want to talk about what's going on with drug imports, we should talk about how to address that as an issue. But bringing tariffs as a tool into trying to solve problems that have nothing to do with trade policy is pretty wild suggestions, and again likely to have some detrimental impacts on all of us as consumers. I would also note a couple of other developments that we've seen over the last few days and weeks since the election with the transition. I mean, one, the person that Donald Trump is recommending and nominating to lead the Commerce Department, to be the Secretary of Commerce, he's not just nominating that person to lead Secretary of Commerce, he's actually going to combine that position, or suggesting to combine that position with the responsibility that traditionally would fall with the U.S. Trade Representative, which is an office within the Commerce Department, but usually a different person. And the person, Lutnick is his last name, that he's suggesting to nominate, is very much a Wall Street guy, not somebody that seems like he would be on the side of trying to use things like trade policy to actually, again, boost domestic production, help American workers, try to keep prices low. It seems like his top priority is keeping Donald Trump happy based on his public statements so far. And again, that's not how you develop good policy. And the other thing I would note is we've already seen some suggestion, and we saw it in the first Trump administration when there were tariffs that were placed a little bit indiscriminately, that in certain industries, for example, tariffs that were placed on washing machines, we saw also price increases with dryers because companies that make those products realized that they had a little bit of cover to raise prices and consumers probably wouldn't know the difference. Similar to what we had talked about during some of the inflation discussions that we've had over the last year, when CEOs going on their earnings calls on the record saying inflation's kind of good for us. Well, tariffs that have no strategy behind them, that are just going to generally increase prices for a lot of goods, create an opportunity for corporations that just want to price gouge and raise prices, even if they aren't subject to a particular tariff, to do that, and counting on the American consumer to not know the difference. And also they know that, based on the signals we're seeing so far, that the government's unlikely to do anything about it. So these are all really troubling developments in a very short period of time. Again, we'll just have to see what actually gets implemented. But if the goal is to try to improve outcomes for workers, boost domestic production, and keep prices low, then you can do that with tariffs, but only if you're pairing it with an effective domestic production industrial policy strategy.
Well, and also the Mexican president said, cool, we're going to hit your ass with tariffs.
Right. So you're, likely leading to some retaliation, which also can have price impacts. So it's a bit of a mess if you're not really going to engage in the necessary negotiations. And again, with a real plan of why you're using a tariff. Tariff can be an effective tool, but not if you're just using it as some kind of political ploy and to kind of assert yourself without any real plan. That is going to have really bad outcomes for workers and all of us in our pocketbooks. And let's just hope that we don't see the follow through.
Well, here's a perfect example. One of these Trump folks, you can go to my iPad, he goes, it's very simple. 84% of Mexico's exports go to the U.S. 77% of Canada's exports go to the U.S. Trump has more leverage and he knows it. Okay, Morgan, let me just be clear. So, exports to the U.S., meaning products in Mexico going to the U.S. Tariffs on those goods are not going to impact Mexico. Tariffs on those goods will be paid by Americans who are buying those products.
Yes, and I think another thing to keep in mind is just because you're putting a tariff on a particular country, it doesn't mean that then they're going to move production back to the U.S. automatically. They also have other options. They can move to other countries. So looking at, for example, at some of the tariffs on China, they can move to other countries in Asia, for example, that will do nothing to actually necessarily, again, if not paired with some kind of domestic strategy, will not lower prices. And a lot of these companies can just bypass their production, bypass the tariff and move their production to other countries that then also will have no positive impact on workers. So this, I can't really repeat it enough. This is really concerning policy, if you want to call it policy ideas, coming from President-elect Trump's camp here and his own words. And it's really unfortunate because I do think it confuses a lot of the public around how tariffs could be used effectively. And of course, overall, we want to see good impacts for all of us. We want to keep prices low. We want to make sure that we have lots of high-paying job opportunities for workers in the U.S., and this is not the path to get there.
The thing that's also interesting is that the Mexican president, she's not playing here. In her letter, she responds to Trump. She says, go to my iPad, 70% of the illegal weapons seized from criminals in Mexico come from your country. We do not produce these weapons, nor do we consume synthetic drugs. Tragically, it is in our country that lives are lost to the violence resulting from meeting the drug demands in yours. President Trump, migration and drug consumption in the United States cannot be addressed through threats or tariffs. What is needed is cooperation and mutual understanding to tackle these significant challenges. She writes, for every tariff, there will be a response in kind until we put at risk our shared enterprises. Yes, shared. For instance, among Mexico's main exporters to the United States are General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford Motor Company, which arrived in Mexico 80 years ago. Why impose a tariff that would jeopardize them? Such a measure would be unacceptable and would lead to inflation and job losses in both the United States and Mexico. All of it, you see, this is the thing that I go back to NAFTA, when all of these white voters in the Midwest, Illinois and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin, they were all, NAFTA is killing us. And I kept trying to explain to people, NAFTA is hurting one part of the country, but it's doing well for other states, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and others.